The Plantagenets were the royal house of England that reigned from 1154 to 1485. This was a family in conflict in the 1400s with two sides, the House of York and the House of Lancaster, each claiming they should rule and be on the throne. Both sides were descended from Edward III, with the House of Lancaster being descendants of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who was Edward's third surviving son, and the House of York being descendants of Edmund of Langley, the Duke of York, who was Edward's fourth son. The conflict started between Henry VI of the House of Lancaster and Richard, the Duke of York, both claiming they were the rightful king. Henry VI became King of England in December 1421, at the age of 9 months old. The country was governed by his council of noble advisers until he was of age to take over himself. During Henry's reign, England was at war with France, and in an effort to unite the two nations and end the conflict, Henry married Margaret of Anjou, niece of the French king, Charles VII, in 1445. This plan failed, and Henry faced criticism from his nobles for losing even more land in France. As Henry suffered with severe mental health problems that prevented him from ruling the country on his own, powerful nobles decided that Richard, Duke of York, should rule as Lord Protector in March 1454. Henry declared himself fit to rule again at the end of the same year. Henry VI called a great council, a meeting of leading nobles, in Leicester in 1455, and Richard was not invited. Richard suspected that Henry was trying to punish his supporters and prevent him from being a threat to the throne. Richard gathered his soldiers and met the king and his advisers at St. Albans. This became the Battle of St. Albans, with Richard winning the battle and taking control of the government, becoming Lord Protector again. This battle is considered to the first battle in the War of the Roses. Once Lord Protector again, Richard secured his succession to the throne with the Act of Accord in 1460, which meant he was in line to become the next king, before Henry VI's son. Once Richard was back in control of England, Henry went into hiding but was soon captured by noble supporters of Richard. Margaret of Anjou, Henry's wife, formed an alliance with Scotland and France to raise her own army to win back power for her husband and secure the throne for her son, Edward. Civil war would be waged for the next 30 years, with the most significant battles being those of Wakefield, Towton, Tewkesbury and Bosworth Field. Henry's Lancastrian army fought against Richard's Yorkist forces outside Sandal Castle, near Wakefield, in 1460. Richard of York and his eldest son, Edmund, were killed, and Henry VI was restored to power. Richard's other sons, Edward, George and Richard, continued the war, trying to win the throne for the Yorkists. The Yorkists blocked the Lancastrians from entering London after the Battle of Wakefield, and the Earl of Warwick crowned Edward, Richard's eldest surviving son, making him King Edward IV of England. This decision left England with two kings, Edward IV and Henry VI, leading to further conflict to decide who would be the official King of England. In March 1461, Edward IV and the Earl of Warwick marched north and fought the Lancastrian army at Towton, near York. In one of the most violent battles ever fought in England, with an estimated 28,000 deaths, Edward IV and the Yorkist army emerged victorious after this battle. Following the deaths of so many leading Lancastrians, Henry VI, his wife Margaret and their son, Edward, fled to Scotland. In 1470, following King Edward IV's resisting his attempts to form an alliance with France, the Earl of Warwick switched his allegiance and formed an alliance with Henry's wife, Margaret, to put Henry back on the throne. Warwick, supported by King Louis XI of France, who provided ships, money and soldiers, landed on the south coast of England and overwhelmed Edward's supporters. Edward left England and fled to Flanders, now in Belgium, in Europe, while Henry VI returned to the throne. Edward IV returned to England in 1471 with an army he had gathered with support from some English nobles and his brother-in-law, Charles of Burgundy. The Lancastrian army, on its way to Wales to join another force, was cut off by Edward's army on the 4th of May 1471, and they decided to fight rather than try and escape. The Lancastrian army was defeated, and King Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou's only son, Edward, was killed on the battlefield. Margaret was captured and paraded through London, where she stayed until King Louis XI of France ransomed her in 1475. Edward IV marched to London after his victory at Tewkesbury, arriving on the 21st of May 1471. King Henry VI died that evening, possibly killed on Edward's orders. Edward IV ruled England until his death in 1483, when his son became King Edward V. Edward V was only 12 years old when he became king, so he and his brother, Richard, waited at the Tower of London for his coronation. The boy's uncle, Richard, was Lord Protector for Edward V in June 1483. Richard, the Lord Protector, announced that Edward IV had not been legally married to his wife, the two princes' mother, and declared that as they were therefore illegitimate, Edward should not be king. Richard claimed that he was therefore the rightful heir to throne and was crowned King Richard III. The two young princes, still in the Tower of London, disappeared and were never seen again. Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian, claimed he should be king when King Richard III was crowned, and he had the support of both the Yorkists and the Lancastrians to support his claim. He believed that as a descendant of Edward III he had a rightful claim. His claim, however, was based of lineage through the female line, which meant he wasn't a direct heir, and his great-grandfather was illegitimate, which meant he could not claim to be a legitimate descendant of a previous monarch. On the 22nd of August 1485, Richard III and Henry Tudor faced each other at the Battle of Bosworth Field to settle this dispute. The powerful Lord Stanley and his brother, William, commanded a 5,000-strong force of troops but were undecided over who to support. They finally pledged their allegiance to Henry, possibly to help increase their own wealth and power, in a decision that would prove to be a deciding factor in Henry's defeat of Richard III. At one point during the battle, Henry's standard-bearer was killed, and it seemed that Richard would win, but it was at this point that William Stanley's army attacked Richard. Richard was killed and his forces fled the battle. Richard was the last English monarch to be killed on a battlefield. After Richard's death, Henry Tudor was crowned King Henry VII. This 30-year-long civil war became known as the War of the Roses, as the white rose was the badge of the Yorks and the red rose was the badge of the Lancastrians.